We're not. I want to clear the room, I'll say. Talk about something else.
Yeah, we sort of like, we're sat here and go, okay, so we're talking about 100 years of the BBC. Do you know anything about it? And I'm like, no. How about you? Like, no.
British Broadcasting.
So,
They've not announced anything yet.
I mean, I guess like it started up in 1922, from what I know.
Well done. That will be 100
We figured that one out.
That would be 100 years. Yes.
I mean, I guess it was predominantly radio.
Yeah.
And it was the voice. I mean, it was.
That was when Fraser Hines started.
That was it.
Fraser on
his panel. You could probably remember when it started.
You probably remember, yeah.
John Fraser was there in 1922. He didn't look any different.
He didn't look any different at all. No. He was this fresh-faced little kid, wet behind the ears.
Well, I can actually, in my research for this panel, which was watching The Crown,
which I've not seen.
Yeah, there's an episode where the BBC are going. So this actually does play into the centenary. Thank you. This actually does play into the centenary somewhat and the role of the BBC. In this episode of The Crown, it's all about the notorious Diana interview that she filmed in secret for the BBC to take down the monarchy.
In 1922.
In 1922. So what it basically was, the chairman of the BBC wanted to do something special for the Queen because it was it her 40th anniversary or something of her reign, or it was an anniversary for the Queen and they wanted to do something special. And instead the BBC did an enormous FU with this Diana tell-all interview, which angered the chairman general of the BBC. And the Queen had made this comment. I mean, it could be just fabrication from the TV series The Crown, which is not entirely factual. But it could be, the Queen had said, the BBC was set up to educate the British public, to keep them informed about what was happening in the country, in the world. And this is in the days when there was just the one channel, and it was largely families sat around their radios. And the programming was largely radio plays and news, and and then I think it was a bit later we had the advent of television, and I think the first watched program by the bulk of the British public was actually the Queen's coronation in '52, which aired. And largely, the broadcasts were in black and white until the sort of 1970s, wasn't it? They went to colour, if I recall correctly. So
slightly before that, I think.
Yeah, it was Doctor Who that went to colour in the
Doctor Who
70s.
went to colour in the 70s, but I think.
But BBC Two had started doing colour, I think, a couple of years earlier.
A couple of years earlier,
Yeah.
But basically what had happened is, of course, they had been very vastly influenced by American TV. Everybody was coming over here from the BBC to look at what the Americans were doing and realise this is going to be the future, whether we want it or not. And a lot of people didn't want it back at the BBC. They liked to keep going the way they were. But they did finally realise this was the way of the future, and reluctantly embraced it.
I think one of the things that made the BBC unpopular, at least in later years, is the fact that it was funded by a licence fee. So you had to pay this frickin' licence fee, and wasn't it per household or per television? I can never remember. But it was cheaper for black and white, and then the licence fee was more for colour television. Everyone complains about the licence fee in England, and why can't there be commercials on the BBC? And I have the unpopular opinion that, if you really want to know what the BBC would be like with commercials, watch BBC America, and then you'll be glad that you pay a licence fee.
Yeah.
So, and let's face it, the BBC does do some boring crap, like these gardening shows that my grandmother watched. But they also do some really, fucking good drama, and it wins awards, like Joanna's Singing Detective, amazing show, and they've done some really good adaptations. I think their news service is good.
One of
music.
New
one of the
tricks.
great things about the BBC is that, in fact, it paid absolutely no attention to what people wanted to watch. They would look down their noses at the first show. There was a show, I don't know, David, you might have been too young for this one. There was a show called Vendetta, which was shot in the mid to late 60s. I can't remember exactly when. Put a lot of money in it. They did overseas filming in Sicily for some of the sequences. John Barry wrote the score. I mean, you know, back then he wasn't cheap. This is back in these days when he was writing James Bond. They spent a lot of money on it. The head of the BBC at the time took one look at it and said, "This is commercial TV, you know, and can, even though it was actually good, doing very well in the ratings and everything, but he said it's commercial. We shouldn't be doing this." But what it did mean is they would experiment. They would do things that commercial TV wouldn't dare to do because they didn't have to make money. The money was made from the license fee. And very unpopular license fee. I remember the old tracker vans that would go around the neighborhood.
Yeah, I mean, it never kind of bothered me. I mean, the principle, I think, is sound. I mean, the BBC very much in the 60s, 50s, 60s, ran on the Reithian principles, and Lord Reithian set it all up, which, as you mentioned, was to sort of like, you know, educate and entertain and whatever that third one was. And very much they took that to heart. And whereas if you're a commercial channel and you're reliant on your advertising, you are inevitably forced down a path of making things that will be popular. You have no choice. Because if what you're showing isn't popular, the advertisers won't come, you won't get any money because nobody wants to watch the shows, therefore the advertisers won't come. So you have to make things that are popular. And I think over the years, when you get the addition of things like Channel 4, Channel 5 in the BBC, in the UK, you see this almost ridiculous chase for the lowest possible denominator of entertainment, and you end up with nothing but endless celebrity quiz shows, challenge shows, whatever, Love Island, The Only Way is Chelsea, The Only Way is Manhattan, The Only Way is Jersey Shore, The Only Way, you know, and these shows, quite frankly, are utter billhooks, but they're popular because people love to watch other people making a fool of themselves. But you couldn't say there's a great, you know, cultural preservation order should be slapped on them because we need to keep these for forever because they're outstanding examples of the quality of entertainment that we have. No, we all watch them because we want to laugh at the stupid
Morons.
messing about. But that's what you get. If you go commercial, you're chasing ratings, and if you're chasing ratings, you're chasing popularism. So you just want the outrageous, the stupid, the quick fix. Yeah, because the BBC didn't have to do that because they're funded by a license fee which is mandatory. I think it's on television. I think it's if you own a television, if you can receive live transmission. That's what we do these days. They say if you can receive live transmission, then you have to have a licence, and that licence goes to fund the BBC. But what that means is that the BBC doesn't have to do inane game shows or celebrity rubbish. They can actually say, well, let's invest some money and do a crime drama set in Jersey or wherever. We can do this really weird, wacky science fiction show called Doctor Who that is so out there, it's crazy. We can do that. You know, we can get David Attenborough to travel the world and look at all of this amazing wildlife and the planet we live on and all of that. And these things are far more satisfying than watching Katie Price fall over a dog poo. Yeah? And I think that's the great beauty of the licence fee. The big worry, I think, as we sit at the moment, is that, of course, because the BBC is paid for by the licence fee, it's impartial. You can argue what that term might mean. but it's impartial. It doesn't have to chase advertisers. It doesn't have to please anybody except itself. It can do what it likes, yeah? And the government hates that. The government hates that the BBC doesn't have to do what they want.
Ruddy Tories.
Outrageous, outrageous. So this is why we get all this, oh, make them commercial, take long, kill the BBC, stop them. You know, how dare they say that our Prime Minister is an idiot? You know, how could they possibly say that?
One, yeah.
All of the above. So you get that kind of element coming in. And I think if they took the licence fee away and made the BBC commercial, you mentioned, I don't know what BBC America's like, no idea. It sounds dire. But you get again that chasing the ratings, that chase of the popularism. And you know, we end up in a cesspool where the only people famous are those that can eat a pizza in 3 seconds.
I'm telling you.
Talent is nowhere to be seen.
You watch Doctor Who, like The End of Time, or one of the Tennant ones where Rosa sang goodbye to him. It was something, it might have been the Eccleston one. Anyway, it's something like she's halfway through and they literally cut it by she goes, I love you, Doctor. And it's like...
That was all of them.
Yeah, and it's like, yeah, I know.
And the worst part is, the bloody commercials are always for a show that's going to be on right after Doctor Who.
Oh yeah, and they don't run the end credits.
Or the
And
commercial
it's
is
like
for the
they
show
whiz
that
through
you're
the end
watching.
credits and they go, and next up on BBC America. And it's...
And they spoil the
Oh yeah,
recognition.
they cut the show.
Oh my God, the Doctor's died!
Yeah.
Coming up on BBC! BBC Everything, Kickstarter, Streamer! BBC Everybody going on!
No. They don't use an American voice.
Hang on,
They use the Top Gear delivery.
Yeah.
And now, on BBC,
God,
see them on the head.
And not even the popular Top Gear with the 3 originals.
And now on BBC One, another episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation, heavily edited that you've seen 3,000 times. It's like, oh my God.
Coming up on BBC America, we have cooking with Gordon Ramsay.
And honestly, you know, well, the bad thing is, like, I've been to some of those horrible BBC America live events they had when they had the new doctors come to New York, and they're like, the BBC America still thinks we're all, like, under the age of 5, and they're all going, we can't hear you! Are you all excited to see Doctor Who? And they have some, like, failed comedian I've never heard of, or even worse, Chris Hardwick. And you're like, who got this prick to talk about Doctor Who? You know, it's like, can we have someone that at least is halfway decent? But the thing is, about the BBC, everyone in this room has to agree we should be thankful that they did Doctor Who.
Yes.
And even though they haven't been at times, like the 60s and 70s, they seemed to support it. The 80s, they lost steam. They wanted to do EastEnders, and then they had this whole not supporting it. And then, of course, they relaunched it. And now, at least, they're bringing back Davis. Love it or not, I'm not in favour of it. But he is a great showrunner, and he can make you believe you like a plate full of shit, you know, and you'll eat it gladly and say it tastes great, Russell. And I admire him for that, because he knows how to sell it. And Doctor Who is now going to enter another golden age. People fear the deal with Disney, but I don't, because it's distribution. I mean, it's going to get exposure for the show, they're going to put money in it, and we're going to end up with a freaking multiverse.
We'll see where it goes. I mean, as you say, the Disney thing is a distribution deal, that's all it is.
And the BBC is still a hands-on, and Russell's hands-on.
But again, Disney is not daft, you know, and if they discover that this distribution of Doctor Who starts to bring in billions for them, which is almost inevitable, they're going to look at it and say, well, can we have more? How can we help you get more? You know, so if we put so much in, we'll get so much back. Well, isn't that good return on a bit of investment? You know, perhaps we should do that. Who knows?
2 or 3 years from now, we're going to need bleachers in this room to fit everyone.
So I mean, I think going back to the I think what we were saying about BBC 100. I mean, it's amazing the BBC's reached 100.
Yes.
I think it's an incredible milestone. But I also think it's unfortunate that we do have these, predatory sharks circling it, wanting to change the way it's done, wanting to change the status quo, wanting to do things for no good reason other than politically motivated reasons. And I think the BBC is at some sort of a crisis point, really, is which way is it going to go? How is this going to play out? And it would be a great shame if it went commercial.
It would be, because, like, and well, the other thing is people complain about the license fee, but look at what you get. I mean, it's actually not that much. And look at all, for just taking this as an example, the natural history programs with David Attenborough and so on, I mean, they are phenomenal.
Yeah.
And they're not cheap to make, and we now have a rich catalogue of natural history documentaries and programs. Some of those creatures and that are now gone, they're extinct. That's all we have.
It's because David Attenborough ate them.
How much are the license fees?
God, you would know better than me, because it was 75 quid when I left.
I think it might be 125 now.
Which is
A
not
month
bad.
or a year or?
I mean,
Yeah.
I pay 3 times that for
Which-
HBO, Disney.
When you
That's
compare
half
it
of what I
to
pay
the,
a month
like
for
a
cable.
streaming channel, you pay a lot less.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not that expensive.
This is the thing, and you
How
say
can,
you,
how can Americans get in on this? That's not
But
fair.
you say-
They should open it up to you.
but you say when people complain about the license fee, do they? I can't remember the last time I heard somebody actually complain about it. The politicians say that people complain about the license
The Daily
fee.
Mail readers.
The newspapers, who are all owned by foreign nationals who are offshore not paying any tax, say that outrage as license fee goes up 1 penny. You know, well, where is this out? There isn't any. So I think it's all politically motivated.
I agree.
Because again, you know, without sound like a joke really. I mean, you know, so the newspapers are owned by offshore magnates who the Barclay brothers and Rupert Maxwell, what is he?
Murdoch.
Rupert Murdoch. No, Maxwell's the guy that went Bobby. Rupert Murdoch, who's Australian. These people don't live in England. They make a fortune from publishing all this so-called news, most of which is rubbish.
I don't know what you mean, David.
And they don't
balanced news.
and they don't pay any tax because, like our friends Starbucks and Amazon and Google and co, and they're all offshore and they all arrange their tax affairs, so they don't have to pay any tax. And these people absolutely want that to continue. They 100% want that to continue. They want to not be able to pay tax, to live offshore, to have the news. Oh, it's fantastic. So how can they do that? Well, the only way they can do that is keep the politicians in power who are prepared, because they have them in their back pocket, to allow them to do that. To say, well, we're not going to change the tax then. So they publish the news and the information which says that these people are great and everyone else is rubbish. And for God's sake, don't vote for them. It'll be hell. Don't vote for them because they want to change the tax rules. And this is where you end up, is that you have a free press, but they're publishing their propaganda, for want of a better phrase, based on what they want, not actual news that people might want in you.
And the BBC
How did we get onto that? I don't know.
Well, no.
Yeah.
I thought you were pitching your run for Prime Minister, but but no, the BBC is actually impartial, and you hear people rant that it's a left-wing mouthpiece. But the fact is, they just present something that's impartial. And you listen to BBC. I know a ton of people from very diverse backgrounds that listen to BBC World News.
£159 a year.
Oh, right. So it's about, what, 200, well, it's probably $159. Probably $140.
But I mean, let's just, look at what the BBC has produced in this 100 years.
Yes.
I mean,
Can you remember all of it, John? Were you there?
yes, I was there.
And now a recital.
I mean, for example, classical music. The classical music on BBC Radio has been going on since the very beginning. They've commissioned works. They've got 4 full-time orchestras, including
Spithead
BBC
commentary.
Wales. You know,
They play in Welsh.
they produce the proms every year. This is all part of their service. I mean, going on to BBC Radio, which is where BBC began. Look at some of the shows they've done. I mean, the obvious one to pick out would be the Goon Show.
Yes.
Because the Goon Show was just absolutely crazy.
It's
I
groundbreaking.
remember I think it was Michael Benty who was saying, you know, we were talking to someone in the BBC, and they said, what is this Go On show? Which showed how little they understood what was happening. But I mean, the Goon Show. There's the Man from the Ministry. That was another one. The Navy Lark,
Yes.
which of course was John Pertwee.
And the late Leslie Phillips.
And the late Leslie Phillips.
Just passed. Yeah.
Just
Left-hand
recently.
Gary
I mean,
Ritchie.
you know, they produced all of this stuff that nobody else would have ever thought of doing.
And they're still doing it. I mean, they're still doing comedy shows, drama shows, discussion shows,
Monty
women's
Python's
hour.
Flying
There's sort of
Circus.
drama and everything. I mean, radio drama, there's not much producing that. And then when you came to TV, well, actually, there you go. I'm doing show and tell. This television close-up, this is the BBC's official magazine from their 25th anniversary of making TV. It's from 1962, so it's just pre-Doctor Who. Pat Troughton's in here, of course, because Pat Troughton was everywhere in the 60s. And during, I hate to say this, but you know what the #1 show was on the BBC at this time? Black and White Minstrels.
Oh.
I mean, that's an embarrassment, thank God. But it was the #1 show. They had a lot of material that was brought over from radio. A lot of the actors on BBC TV started out on radio and then were transferred over. I mean, Hancock. Tony Hancock was a huge hit back then. Very unlikely kind of TV show. A very unlikely hero. But
it's continued though, isn't it, John? It's continued through the years. I mean, I was listening to Radio 3, which is usually the classical channel, you know, and they're playing the Star Wars suite because it's like that is now classical music. It's you know, the stuff that John Barry composed, John Williams, you know, Ennio Morricone, all these great soundtrack composers that we have, like I've worked over the last 20, 30 years. They keep saying to Sam, this is the new classical music. This is the new, you know, it's not pop music.
Yeah.
So, you know, and you think, well, if you know, Mozart, Beethoven and co were alive today, they'd probably be composing music for films.
I'm sure
they'd be doing.
A lot of them were composing music which was, at the time, atmospheric.
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
They sort of told a story that evokes an emotion. That, yeah.
Well, the other thing is about the BBC, in my humble opinion, they produce the best comedy in the world. Because
Yes.
I'm sorry, guys, but I haven't watched because I give up. I watched a lot of American comedies, and it's the same formula. And I'm sitting there, and like the audience are absolutely pissing themselves. There's probably canned laughter. And I'm like, what is so funny? I put on Fawlty Towers, and I have ruptured my stomach muscles laughing. Like when Basil thrashes his car because it stalls, and my wife looks at me and says, my American wife looks at me and says, that's you, that is. And then, like, when something goes wrong around that, I go, right, fine, I'll just, and she's like, oh my God, Basil. And it's, if you haven't seen Fawlty Towers, in my humble opinion, it's the funniest show ever made. And I would also urge you, one of my all-time favourites is Are You Being Served?
Yes!
And honestly, I dare you to watch a Mr. Slocum pussy joke and not laugh, and it's your mind making you.
well, for me, of course, the classic comedy show is Steptoe's Son.
Oh,
Which,
superb.
I mean,